thanks for coming here. It's really nice to see a full room. And first of all, I'd like to kind of warm the crowd by asking a show of hands, how many of you have played the game I'm going to be talking about today, Brawl Stars? Nice. Okay, how many of you started with the global launch? Sometime during the soft launch, beta. Wow. How many of you played the game in portrait mode, like this, instead of this? Wow, okay. Nice. I'm sure you have some questions. I hope this talk is going to answer some of them, or raise more questions that I can answer later. All right, so the topic of the talk is a bit whimsical. So if you don't get it now, well, let's say if you don't get it after the talk, then I didn't do my job. But by core, I mean some core design element of the game. And the talk is about how we, during the soft launch, which went on for a long time, tried a lot of things, a lot of very fundamental changes in our game, and what the results were. But first, a little bit about me. I started at Supercell about 8 years ago. Worked on the very first browser-based MMO, and also have been working on various fun small projects, iterations, and experiments, prototypes. For example, this one. This is a world premiere for Forest Ranger, circa 2011. Just a quick 1 week prototype with one artist. And also after we pivoted to mobile games, I worked on the very first game that was killed by Supercell. RIP. It's appropriately in black and white there, very morose, called Project Tower. After that, I worked on Heyday, Boom Beach, and early on in Clash Royale. And now for the last 2.5 years, I've been working on Brawl Stars. So today I'm going to be covering these topics. First of all, how we got into beta. Yeah, right, okay. How we got into beta, and then getting into the meat of what I just was talking about a moment ago, the iterations we did, trying to find the perfect control scheme, improve player engagement and experience on the long term with different iterations of the progression system, and then stuff we overlooked, social gameplay, and I wouldn't say overlooked, but I certainly have a different perspective now on the kind of feedback we got from the community. So let's jump right in. Back in 2015, there was a lot of excitement at Supercell about Clash Royale. The game wasn't going to be in beta for several months still, but the promise of a real-time multiplayer, at least two-player competitive game was definitely in the air, and we thought the world is ready for a game that quite a lot of us, a type of game on mobile that quite a lot of us like to play, and didn't exist yet. So after Clash Royale went to beta, this was proven, and we thought, okay, the market is ready as well, not just the technology. And but even before Clash Royale went to beta, we were prototyping with a small team on a multiplayer action shooter. And between 2016 and 2017, we had 3 internal milestones. We call them, or the target of these milestones is always a company playable being a small, relatively small company, we have the advantage of getting or potentially getting everybody at the company playing our new game projects, getting a very wide variety of different backgrounds, from finance to legal to marketing to game teams, player support, engaged in our games and giving feedback from their own perspectives. Also, this has been kind of a staple of Supercell game development for years now. We also tested with real players because for us the major worry was fast-paced controls on a mobile device or any kind of touchscreen device. And we wanted to see if our control scheme designs were actually usable by regular people. We were confident enough to soft launch the game on June 15th of 2017 in Canada and on iOS only. And we'll come back to this decision. Actually, we'll talk about it right now a little bit. So a lot of you know why games often get soft launched. In Canada, for Supercell, the reasons are pretty much the same. It's a smaller market that's quite comparable to the US, which is one of our has historically been our most important market. And it also allows us to compare the performance of the beta to our previous betas and get some insight of how we're doing, what the target should be. It's much easier to develop just for one platform, and iOS has traditionally been the one we develop for at Supercell. For Brawl Stars in particular, matchmaking was a concern, so we wanted to limit ourselves to one geographic region at first to have people playing in the same time zone so that our beta population wasn't spread out all over the world, to make sure that they have a good, fast matchmaking experience. And finally, we were concerned about the game spreading, especially the APK spreading out, and too many people, or more people than we would prefer, having the kind of not finished, not polished soft launch experience of the game instead of saving it for the global launch. It turned out to be the longest beta in Supercell history, 545 days, which was a long time for both the players who started early on and for the game team. The reasons for that are, well, again, historical. We have been able to release very popular games before, and all the new game projects are going to be, all the new games are going to be compared to these games. So we already had some fairly ambitious goals going into the project. And in addition, while we're quite happy to kill or poorly performing games in soft launch, we're committed to support the game for years for the players once we go global. Okay, now I'm going to show a quick video. I'm not sure if the sound's going to work or not. How the game looked when we launched in June 2017. And if you play the game today, you might notice that it looks quite similar to, fairly similar to how the game, that state almost 2 years ago and today look fairly similar, but almost everything has changed under the hood.
Vámonos! Sorry, noob. Angry Ball!
Bling bling!
You wanna brawl?
All right. So let's talk about some of those changes under the hood. First, I'm going to dial back the time a little bit before we went to beta and talk about various control scheme iterations we had before and during. We are still pretty proud of how we've been able to innovate with touchscreen controls. In Heyday, in Clash Royale, in Clash of Clans even, we felt that we really raised the bar to how you, for the usability of touchscreen games. And we didn't want to go with the default option for an action shooter, which is dual joystick type of game. These games were out already, several of them, but basically none of the early team liked dual joystick controls. So that started a long process of prototyping, experimenting, with the main objective of trying to take some of the twitchiness, the fast-paced movement, and excessive tapping or control actions out of the game. This is one of the prototypes where the player actually only moves the character by tapping on the screen, and you can see a faint outline where that shows the range of the character's weapon. And once an opponent gets into range, the character will automatically fire. This was a fairly fun control scheme, but we thought we could do better and also felt like we should give the players more control. Also, there were always complaints about the slow-paced feeling or the kind of deliberate pace of the gameplay. Here's the following iteration. And in terms of the core combat, this is pretty much what ended up in the soft launch version. Even though you might notice the game looks fairly different, but that's a topic for a whole other talk. So in this iteration, you can see the little cursor moving around. The player taps where they want to move and swipes and releases to fire. And the place where they release is the targeting point of their attack. So now we moved from auto-attacking only to pure skill shots. And we thought this felt like a very good compromise. It didn't feel too hectic, and the controls were simple and reasonably easy to learn. Until we started user testing. This is from March 2017, and an actual user playing the game for the first time, having about to start their first game, and immediately we noticed something strange, or something that was different from the way we play the game. So in the team, we'd been playing the game by holding the device on one hand and then tapping with the index finger of the other to do the controls, execute the controls, movement, and firing. But this is not how people actually use their cell phones. So instead of pecking on the screen like an old person, our testers were using 2 thumbs as if texting the regular way they use their phone, and also our ideas of deliberate and kind of low actions per minute gameplay went out the window. It turned out to be incredibly hectic, as you can see on the video. So the feedback from shooting wasn't sufficient to let the player know that this is all the actions they can take for the moment. So the testers and our co-workers alike reported feeling very overwhelmed by the combat because they felt like they had to do 250 actions per minute. So based on this testing and the feedback we'd been getting, we did one more iteration before going to beta for our control scheme. And this was introducing the dreaded virtual joystick. So we didn't change the game dramatically, unlike between the 2 previous iterations, where, by the way, I forgot to mention that the reason we turned the game into portrait mode was for that more natural way of holding your handheld device. We were designing for phones as the primary platform, and we felt, especially with the experience of Clash Royale, that this was the way to go. So there was one virtual stick at the bottom corner. You could customize that for either left or right-handed, and then you would tap where you wanted to shoot. Now, user testing found that this was also frustrating for players, and the kind of drifting stick we had designed ended up drifting all over the screen. However, one thing we found from both the company playables, user testing, and our just playing with the team internally was that when you played together, when you were in the same room, you could put 3 absolute beginners in the same room and they would still have fun, even if they struggled with the controls. This guy is really enjoying himself after playing the game maybe about 10 or 15 minutes, and there's good communication going on, and there is a lot of laughter and overall a really nice gameplay experience. We'll come back to this later. Okay, so here are the 2 control modes we had to choose between. Tap, once again, you hold the device however you hold it, and tap by your chosen finger to move, and then swipe and release to fire. Whereas the joystick movement was basically holding the device on one hand, and then with the other hand free, you would tap where you want to shoot. The joystick would control your character. We can decide. The user testing was indecisive. Company playables, voting after our company playable gave us no clear winner. So we decided that let's let the players decide. We assigned all new players, decided to assign all new players in the beta with one of these 2 control models. However, even they couldn't decide. So looking at the retention, how long the players stick with the game, there was no clear winner between the 2 control models. That left us scratching our heads until our data scientist dug a bit deeper and found one clear difference. Players were switching more to the joystick controls from tap controls than vice versa. And that led us to eventually phase out the tap controls. They remained as an option in the menus, but everybody got joystick controls as the first choice. Now, there's a twist, and it's this. Eventually, about 9 months later, we decided to turn the game back to landscape. Well, back. It had always been in portrait mode. And this was more or less a natural progression from that single joystick. We had also already experimented with double joystick, even though we hadn't tested it. But on a portrait mode screen, you didn't really have room for your two thumbs to maneuver if the phone was in portrait mode. So with the popularity and eventual acceptance of victory of the single joystick, it just felt like a more natural method of controlling the game. Going to one joystick was basically opening the door for the two joysticks. And that required this quite big change. And of course, it had a huge impact on core gameplay. We had to teach players who'd been playing the game, some of them for 9 months, to relearn the shooting controls all over. We had to implement a whole new auto aim or quick fire feature where tapping the right joystick would shoot at the nearest opponent. And I'll come back to the fallout from this in the community feedback section. All right, so these are the different control mode iterations we made before and during the beta. Let's move on to progression. So when the game went to beta, oh, there's another pun. The upgrade system, well, the upgrade screen looked like this. So we had decided to go with an upgrade system as something for players to strive for, to give them meaningful progression from one session to the next, or 1 week to the next, when they've been playing more and more. And our first iteration of this that actually went out to players was very much like say an RPG game, where you had points to allocate to different character traits or attributes. Now, in a competitive game, this is risky because any kind of power progression means that you'll sometimes face players with more powerful characters than you. So we tried to walk a fine line here by keeping the power scaling very small compared to, for example, Clash Royale has, if you look at the very maximum of scaling you can have with common cards, it's about 200%. So we went on the very conservative side. And if you take into account the fact that you rarely face, due to matchmaking, have this maximum difference in any one match. Anyhow, it felt like a good compromise. And in fact, even though we were quite concerned about this choice, we had good results. So players weren't complaining about the game being played to win. Instead, the progression system, at least in the beginning, felt meaningful. This upgrade resource used for every kind of upgrade in the game was in loot boxes, and also added much needed content to the loot boxes, so that the box we gave the player at the end of every session, or at least the end of every day if you played actively, would contain something useful that would make you feel like you're getting ahead in the game. However, it wasn't very satisfying to get a single elixir bottle. Anybody remember this screen? Yeah. And in fact, even getting massive amounts of elixir didn't feel that great. There was a long-standing misconception among our players that getting 10 elixir cheated you out from getting a legendary character. So people felt really bad missing out on Spike and Crow, or so they thought, even though the drop rates were very, very different. But despite many attempts to communicate that, the rumor or the misconception just stuck. We saw that people weren't sticking around and assumed that a big part of the reason was that this progression system wasn't satisfying enough. And we also saw this from the community. A lot of complaints about getting duplicate brawlers, which was another thing back then, and small elixir drops that felt meaningless. So we decided to iterate the progression system. So 6 months into the beta, it looked completely different. And if you don't get what's going on there, I don't blame you. We addressed one issue that people had with the progression system, which was having difficulty deciding where to allocate the elixir, which characters to upgrade. You would always be second guessing which character is going to be nerfed in the coming update, which character is going to be buffed. Am I really going to enjoy playing with this guy? Because once you allocated your resource, it was gone. Well, it was permanently allocated with no chance of respecking. We took some of that difficulty of choice out while keeping the same amount of power scaling. So instead of a unified upgrade resource, we now had these pins, badges, medals, and crests, which were unique items for each character, improving one of their stats. And all of these were added to the loot boxes. So there was a lot more variety now that you could get when you opened a box at the end of the session. And there was even a chance of non-linear upgrades. So you might get lucky and pick up a crest for attack damage, for example, from just a random box. So now there was some dynamic range to the boxes you opened, other than just characters, which were quite few and far between once you had the common ones and the rare ones. In addition, we went a step further by adding a star power to each character, which actually changed the gameplay. So as you can see, maybe it's tiny text, but Shelly's star power gives her the ability to slow down enemies when she hits them with a super. There were some downsides to it. It made balancing between characters who do have the star power and don't have it a little bit more complicated. You had to take both into account, or just balance for the top level fully upgraded players, and also having the star powers in the game made the game a little bit harder to understand. You didn't know exactly what you were facing when you entered the game. You might be slowed down by Shelly's super or not. And also, the whole upgrade screen was really hard to explain for first-time players. It did its job, though. We were able to see a noticeable bump in longer-term retention. However, here comes the twist. we were going to have to redo the UI anyway when we went to landscape. And as a leap of faith, we decided to try something, well, tried and true. So only 3 months later, we released another progression system. Yeah, you can imagine how the players felt. Some of you felt it too. This second iteration during the beta had a upgrade or progression system that was quite similar to Clash Royale. So similarly to how cards are stacked until you can upgrade them, now we had, in Clash Royale, now we had PowerPoints that are character specific, and you use coins to enact the upgrade. There were some changes because of that. There was absolutely no choice anymore when it came to choosing which character trait to upgrade. You could only pick which character to actually finalize the upgrade for with coins. So to make up for this change, we introduced 10 different upgrade levels and increased the power scaling in order to make each level feel significant. So this was another kind of leap of faith to see, and we had to see how the community would react, but this was the least of the community's worries. The game still apparently felt fair, but even though this new interface was much nicer looking, and there was no more confusion about pins, badges, medals, crests, tokens, etc. We had really simplified everything. We couldn't improve metrics, and a bit later on I'll be talking about how the players felt about this. All right, now that I've gone over the control scheme iterations, the progression system iterations, let's talk about something we didn't improve for a year, which is playing with friends. So, as I said before, we knew the game is fun when you play it with friends. That's the best gameplay experience. But actually playing with people you know together was quite difficult. We made you jump through quite a hoop. You either had to be face-to-face and input this 5 character code to enter your friend's game room, or you might get some people, semi-random people from your clan that we called bands back then, which are called clubs now. Yeah, iteration, right? So you had by far the most fun when you managed to play with your friends. And for example, our finance team is still playing together ever since the early beta, because they got into the habit of typing in the room code, even now that you don't actually always have to do that. They play together and have had amazing retention. You can't say the same for most players. Even though you get a competitive edge from playing with your friends, you can figure out the team composition that you want to play for a certain map, certain game mode. For most people ended up playing by themselves, just trusting the random matchmaking. And instead of focusing on some way to get your actual friends in the same room with you, we had this. We only enabled players to invite band members, and band members typically they aren't in your close circle of friends, and basically anybody who happened to be online might join you. There was no in-game friends list, so if there was somebody that you played with, some random person, there was absolutely no way to connect with them afterwards, even if you wanted to. And finally, like I said earlier on, this was a very fateful decision for us to go with iOS only, because if you think about a game that is best played with friends, if you have an iOS device and your friend happens to have an Android device, you just can't play with them, and that's a hard stop. Unless you get them to buy an iPhone or iPad just for Brawl Stars, and that's a hard sell. So word of mouth and the kind of excitement a fun multiplayer game can achieve was definitely dampened by going iOS only. And also, you can't really tell your friends to start playing a game if they can't play the game. All right, which kind of gets me to community feedback. So let's start by talking about the way we handle our community. Ever since the beginning of the beta, it's been centered on Reddit. Even though we have some social media presence and a YouTube channel, we actually direct people from inside the game to our Reddit with various in-game news posts. And we've had several thousand more or less active members on Reddit throughout the beta. And we also communicate with our community through our subreddit. In return, we get a lot of suggestions, complaints, and all kinds of cool stuff like fan art. However, having a very passionate community also means that they're going to speak out when things are not going well from their perspective. So all the stuff I've been telling you about, the iterations we made to core functionality was very jarring for the player community. So we changed the progress system, even though we always refunded everything. So people got back anything they'd spent on improving their characters and got to respec. It was still a big jarring change to relearn, but even more than that, changing the control model was really tough for a lot of players. They had to relearn very basic functionality of the game and give up a lot of the skills they'd learned. And on top of that, we provided very little content between these big core gameplay changes. And the thinking was that we already know from the early beta that whenever we release something new, a new brawler, a new game mode, or something like that, that is exciting for players, it increases our metrics. And so now we can focus on something else. And finally, as you know, hard as it is to say, there's often been this kind of drop in the bucket mentality where our beta player base is seen as sort of expendable. Not entirely. We do listen to them and we communicate with them and appreciate their feedback. However, compared to the global player base, this is a very small amount of players. So we take the beta stage as a chance to make big changes and experiment. And after global launch, those kind of big changes would be very, very detrimental for the future of the game. So it's a sacrifice we've been willing to make. However, with an active, passionate, and angry community on Reddit, just 2 taps away from starting the game, where you can see, a new player can see a wall of, okay, this is not a wall of posts, but just a complaint about how the community sentiment was. As recently as a year ago. It's a really big warning sign for somebody who's starting a new game, checking out the community, what the game has to offer. And even our content creators were affected by the state of affairs. So YouTube content creators have been really important for us historically and currently, as people who drive in new players, who keep the current player base engaged, and overall sort of positive avatars to show what our games are at their most fun. Here's one of them. Karstein has been with us from the very beginning, and he's one of our most popular YouTubers. And okay, he looks like he's pretty sad at this point. But actually he's acting, because we did something different in May 2018. So this was a stage in the beta where even the game team was already very frustrated by the apparent lack of movement in metrics. We weren't able to improve the game sufficiently to feel confident that we could globally launch. And so after these major core gameplay changes, we decided to focus on something else. Okay, we'd now gotten all that stuff off the plate. Even the huge previous update had no significant impact on metrics. So instead, we released new characters, new game modes, and crucially, improved social gameplay. There was now an in-game friends list, a play again functionality, where you could actually keep playing with the same randoms if you found them to be a good team, and improvements to economy, and a new focus on rewarding the player for climbing in trophies, for getting better. So we, instead of just rewarding the grind, now we very visibly rewarded the players actually getting better, winning games, and moving ahead. And for the first time, we kind of reversed course. We took rewards out of loot boxes and offered them as rewards for climbing in trophies. And then in June, okay, this is the same lonely spike in the desert photo I saw, pic I showed before, but actually it's a teaser for Brawl Stars Android launch. There's a, if I can point your attention to Spike's shadow, that's where the teaser is. Ever since Brawl Stars went into beta, every YouTube post, video we'd posted, pretty much every YouTube video our influencers had posted, every Facebook post, pretty much every official Supercell Reddit post on the Brawl Stars subreddit had a bunch of, where's Android? Where's Android? Where's Android? That was the number one question every time. We had a lot of followers who didn't even themselves have an iOS device, but were either Supercell fans or just wanted to play the game, and were committed enough to come back and ask for the Android release for months and months and months. So this smashed down the wall between iOS players and their Android friends and Android-owning friends. And we actually still have organic growth ever since this update in some regions where we don't actually actively acquire new users. So it's quite amazing what a difference it makes when you allow people to play together. We were, for a while before, talking about how well this game could do in Asia. And so this was planned as a sort of 1-2 punch Hail Mary shot to see if Brawl Stars still had legs and could be viable. And yeah, took us a year. And what was the result after June 2018? Okay. I think I broke this slide. Here we go. So here's what happened. We'd been very used to hearing "Thank you, Supercell" on Reddit in a very sarcastic tone. As you can see in the top comment there, thank you for ruining such an amazing game. After the May and June updates, it basically took a 180 turn, and people were super excited and grateful for us actually listening to the community and providing this update. And with the numbers in Asia looking good, the game team was energized. Content creators had a lot more to make videos about, and everything looked good to go global, take that chance. But I'm not actually going to talk about that now. I'm going to leave you there and talk about some takeaways from the long beta. So, first of all, I think we made a lot of nice, innovative designs, both in terms of controls and in terms of the upgrade progression systems. And there are still things, people look back on, players and game team members alike, with some nostalgia. There's always a give and take and a compromise when you decide to iterate, and some of the innovations still feel close to heart and might have actually worked if if things turned out differently. However, you shouldn't be afraid to fall back on proven designs, as we did both with the controls and the progression. Everybody in the team agrees that this is the best Brawl Stars we've had. The other thing is that looking at retention to try and gauge how much fun the players are having, how engaged they are, has its risks, because there's a lot of things that go to such a broad metric as retention. And like we experienced with the iterations we made, we weren't really able to make a big dent or big bump with the metrics at any point. The first metagame iteration was upgrade progression iteration was probably the best we had. And now this might be raise a few questions, but at least for Supercell games, a lot of players know that they're playing a beta. So you have to be cognizant of that. So player behavior will change if they're unsure about where the game is going. If you don't release new characters, that might affect even new cohorts when they look back at, hey, what's this game like? A lot of players are very savvy and have been there before with soft launches, especially a lot of the more valuable players to you, the most likely to engage or monetize players. Then I talked about this. You should implement the most fun features of your game, the things that you know are the best game experience, and try to enhance them, and not just believe that, okay, we've proven this, or we know this intrinsically, and we can do something else first, and try to bump other stuff first. These could be such important. The most important fun in your game might determine the overall game experience so much that it ends up masking other improvements you might make. Now, this is an assumption on my part, but I firmly believe that if we'd focused on social gameplay earlier, we might have been out of the beta much sooner, or at least confident that the game is going to fly much sooner. And then finally, often when you read posts by your community, it can seem that they're in an echo chamber, just shouting out the same thing and reacting to minor things that you already know or you feel like aren't the priority right now. And this does happen, but that doesn't mean that the community is always wrong. Actually, the community was quite right in our case. So it was a compass that constantly pointed towards Android, and it just took us a while to navigate there. That's my takeaways, but wait, there's more. Tomorrow, Frank is going to give a talk on that final push, well, including the May update, some of the team dynamics of how Supercell was able to push Brawl Stars out, and that final push towards global launch and beyond. So please go and check it out. Thanks for listening. All right, any questions?
Yeah, could you go into the friends changes a little bit? I mean, you said you had room codes and went to friends list, but it was kind of like you went quick over that. Could you go into that a little more detail?
Sure. So we added, I kind of quickly mentioned this, but we added a way to keep playing with friends, keep playing with strangers who you'd met in the random matchmaking queue, and then added them to a suggestion list where you could actually add them as permanent in-game friends on a friends list, and then invite them easily to your game rooms in the future.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I have already every Supercell game on this pad.
Great.
But for this Brawl Stars game, I'm a dead player already. Not your fault, maybe. I'm too busy. Okay. So I was playing a game earlier last year, and I think there is a period actually you have advertisement which can double the loot boxes. And I was there and collect a lot of these rewards, but suddenly I think it's canceled. Uh, do you think it's not unsuccessful, or it's like you try to find another way to get income from this game?
So you're talking about the coin or token doublers that we had in the game?
The advertisement. I think you tried, but you canceled it.
Yeah, we thought they were two different systems that were overlapping at that stage, and we decided to keep just one, the one that was more easily understood by players. You know, not the time-based. We got rid of the time-based one and kept the one that had a very clear, system where this is how many coins or tokens you'll keep doubling in the future. So, yeah, it was. Also, not that well received by players. We didn't get so many sales
Okay, thank
on
you.
the time-based one. Yeah.
Hello. Hello.
sorry.
Thanks for the talk.
Yeah.
On my side, I played a lot Brawl Stars with friends locally because I think it's really important to communicate to play effectively. But you don't have any in-game way of communicating, no emotes, no voice recording. Is it something that you have tested and cut, or is it something that you plan to integrate in the game?
Yeah, it's another thing we've been talking about for a long time. I think it would go into that social gameplay section that we were very slow in starting to implement or improve. Yeah, thanks.
For me, I had a question about the general, vision and design philosophy towards the Elder game, because it's something I found lacking in both Clash Royale and Brawl Stars. That once you get your cards, if you don't want to rank on the leaderboard, you really don't have something to do, and you definitely see that in your version of the progression bar, where after about 1,000 trophies, there's just very little content that you get from it. So yeah, I just want to know your design thoughts on the Elder game.
I'm not sure if I understood. Can you rephrase?
Sure. So after you progress a certain amount in the game,
Yeah.
right, and you've got all the characters, maybe you've got a couple of the star
Sure,
powers,
sure.
there's really nothing for you to do
Yeah.
because you're kind of done. So,
All right, so we're looking at ways to give you more more goals when you're climbing in trophies. Instead of focusing just on the stuff you can collect from loot boxes or buying from the shop. So that ever since the May update with the trophy road, that's been a focus for us. And now we're looking at ways to make it more sustainable, where it doesn't feel like you hit the ceiling. So we're looking at different options for that, and definitely the focus is now going to be on the trophies next. And obviously, we're going to add more characters and add more. Obviously, with every character, there's going to be another star power, and so the content will keep coming. And also, we're looking at ways to improve the trophy grind as well.
got it. Cool.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So thank you a lot for your talk. It was very interesting. I'm Marie. I work on the Elder Scrolls Blades, and it was really interesting to see all the adventures you had with landscape and portrait. I kind of gave a talk about that on Monday, and as you may know, Bethesda decided, because there was no clear winner, for very similar reasons than the ones you said, we decided to allow players to basically flip their phones when they want. So we removed the orientation lock. And I was wondering if you had considered it and why you didn't retain the idea.
Right. So for Brawl Stars being a competitive multiplayer game, it's really important that the players are on a level playing field.
Yeah.
And even now, we have to do some compromises when it comes to very wide aspect ratios, where some of the screen is covered. You don't have vision there. If we had both portrait and landscape at the same time, we would basically need to have a square in the middle and lose most of the screen real estate to be able to make it fair and even for everyone.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, yeah, I had a question about your early internal playtesting and
Yes.
how many characters and modes you needed to put in there before internal playtesting started to be a lot more fun. You know, was probably a lot more than one, and so that's the question.
Right. So we went to beta with 16 characters. I think the early well, you saw actually the character selection screen there earlier on, and
But even before beta
cheat.
internally.
Yeah. So these are both internal playtests. Here we had 6 characters in this playtest, and in this one we had. Let me just start it. Only 5. So, and this was the game mode in most of the playtests internally. We
5 or 6.
only added a second game mode, I think, for the final internal playtest.
Gotcha. And one clarification question. It sounded like you were saying that all of these changes to the meta and controls barely moved the metrics, and it was really the social changes that moved everything.
Yeah, well, social we can only assume because, even after we improved the social gameplay, we didn't see a massive bump in the previous beta countries. So I don't know if we burned out our user base or what exactly happened there, but luckily we launched in Asia as well and got a fresh new place, especially in Singapore where we had amazing numbers compared to before. So yeah, one of the progression iterations did give a nice bump in day 30 retention though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Hi. So, if I'm understanding your monetization and progression systems appropriately, it seems like a core part of it is unlocking new characters and then upgrading those characters, which seems to be a little bit at odds with, at least for new players, that the gameplay of wanting to master a character, which for a skill-based game seems like it would be more of an element than games with the lower skill ceiling in the industry. Do you guys see that tension as a problem to be solved, something to improve, or are you happy with where it's at?
So the question is about the amount of skill cap we built in, or?
The idea that some players are going to want to sort of master a character, play a
Oh, right.
smaller roster
Yeah, maining.
versus
Yeah.
unlocking
Okay.
new ones.
No, I got it. Thank you. One more question. Okay. So I'll try to answer this quickly and give one more. So we see this happening, and it's not the optimal way to play the game. Actually, you'll get a lot less rewards from and progression in the game if you do that. So we're hoping that the system where you share trophies, each character has individual trophies, and it's easier to progress early on with every new character. Eventually will drive people not to main a certain character or focus on a certain character, but try to play the game in a different way from maybe what they're used to, because the game itself has a wide variety of different events, and you should learn to play at least 4 or 5 archetypes of character to be able to be competitive and play in a team game. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I have more, but I'm going to take
Okay,
it.
thank you.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Great talk today. And
Thanks.
We already know that you have a soft launch for a long time for these
Yeah.
games. And we also know that you queue a lot of games before even come out in your company.
Sure.
And so my question is, when it comes to the decision, whether continue to make an adjustment or just give up and move on to another game, what factor do you consider?
So
into
before
making-
going into beta, it's the team decides if they feel like the game has a chance. Also, the internal testing company playables, they give very important feedback from the whole company to the team as a sanity check to see if they're hitting, if the company shares that feeling or the other employees share that feeling. But essentially, it's the team who decides to go to beta. Obviously, we trust. It has to be based on trust. So we trust every team to be realistic in their expectations. And if the team feels strongly that the game is ready for soft launch, we go to soft launch, and then after that, basically the players decide.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for coming.